Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. First question. Hey Jason, what type of training do you recommend for someone who doesn't know when they will be in the gym regularly? I'm an intermediate lifter and I've started the Texas method recently, but have found it difficult to stick to the rigid Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule whilst building a house, and thus have a sporadic free time schedule to lift. Should I go back to starting strength or similar linear hypertrophy programs since I might miss a few sessions here and there, and just resign myself to slower progress? As to the latter, yes, you're going to have to resign yourself to slightly slower progress based upon the amount of days you miss. In other words, if you miss 20% of your training days, expect to lose 20% of your results. Pretty straightforward. Now, what I would recommend, it is supposed to be a rigid Monday, Wednesday, Friday method on that particular program. But if you have to miss a day every second week due to your schedule, or you have to rotate them through and miss one and come in the next day later, and so your whole schedule gets bumped back another day and another day, just follow the Monday, Wednesday, Friday pattern accordingly. So if you have the next 12 workouts scheduled and they're supposed to be done over 4 weeks, and you have to spread them out over 5, just come in and do the next session, even if you missed one. Repeat the work that you're supposed to do on the session that you missed. In other words, if you have Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you have to miss Wednesday and you can't get in again until Friday, do Wednesday session Friday, and just move the template up accordingly. And you'll still get the same results from the total number of workouts. It's just going to take you more days and weeks to get there. So that's the best way to go about something like that if your schedule doesn't allow for you to follow the rigid exact day structure on a program. And I would tell you the same thing if you were running one of my programs. All right, next question. Do you see any point in using weighted stretchers intra-workout to induce additional hyperplasia, and can this stimulate growth in a calorie deficit? All right, you guys need to quit worrying about stimulating growth in a calorie deficit when you're not on drugs or you're not a complete noob. You need to forget that shit. Now, as far as weighted stretches go, yeah, we do know they cause extreme hyperplasia in animals when we studied them, but remember, the type of stretching we're doing on animals wouldn't be ethical to do in humans, and odds are without lots of morphine and other painkillers, you wouldn't be able to handle the pain of it. It would bury you. You just would not be able to take the pain threshold of what we do to them in these animal studies. They would never be cleared for ethics. In human, you'd pretty much be considered the next Joseph Mengele if you did this to a person. And there's no way you'd have the pain threshold to do it to yourself. But there is definitely the evidence for hyperplasia with that in animals. What I would say, don't do it intra-workout, do it in muscles that you've already trained for weighted stretching and things. If you want to try it, there might be some small possibility for hyperplasia, but I'm going to say odds of it being useful to someone who's drug-free is pretty low. For people who use drugs that seem to induce hyperplasia, things like tren or growth hormone or things like that, and definitely in animal models, the weighted stretches might be worth your while to utilize for hypertrophy purposes, because again, the hyperplasia is going to lead to more potential for hypertrophy through cell splitting and proliferation of new satellite cells. It might very well be useful to you to try that if you're on certain drugs, but it may not give you any results. But what the hell? All right, next question. Deload, is the point supposed to be to take it easy on the 50 to 70% of normal weight, or still be explosive with a reduced load / volume? You're supposed to be reducing the total load on yourself, but it doesn't mean that you should reduce bar speed. If you deload with a slow bar speed, you're not stimulating yourself to move the bar fast. I would still recommend that you move the bar at your same explosive speed that you do during your normal days. But remember, you're still going to be resting and recovering a lot more. You're not going to fatigue yourself moving 50% of your normal work rates just as fast. So you're perfectly fine there. You're still training the bar speed and the speed strength that you have been training, but with a reduced weight. So you're obviously going to recover and super compensate anyways, even doing that. So you shouldn't be worried about reducing it even further. If you want to reduce the load even further, then go under 50%, but I wouldn't recommend that. Just keep doing your same explosive lifts with a lighter weight. All right, next question. In your video with Big J, I saw that you helped him with the first rep on the shoulder press. Why is unracking, setting up the lift, so much harder than the lift itself? Well, because the bottom of most exercises is the most difficult part. Just like on the bench press, the hardest part is off the chest. On the deep squat, the hardest part is off the bottom. So the lower that you go, the more difficult it is to lift the same weight. Now, normally I would tell people that if you're not strong enough to move something through the full range of motion, then you need to work on either reducing the weight and checking your ego. But when you're dealing with Big J specifically, I know a little bit about his history and his medical history and training history. Big J has damaged both of his shoulders historically. And so on some of those machines, the range of motion that they allow for is further than he can really get away with his previous injuries and repaired joints. So he has to shortchange that bottom a little bit, and that's just unfortunate. And that would be my advice to you guys. Look at the example of Big J on that. Learn from him, and a lot of the techniques he does for all his dumbbell pressing and everything, he really goes out of his way to protect his shoulders now that he's older and he's injured them. So incorporate some of that into your training so you won't be at the point to where you can't stretch and do the weight at those bottoms, so that you're not injured like he is. And he's just making the best of the situation that he can. And so you got to give him props for that, but learn from him and don't fuck your shoulders up when you're younger, like a lot of you guys are out there doing, so that you're not in that situation later. But that is the issue, is that it is more difficult at the bottom, and oftentimes, particularly people who've injured themselves like that, they're simply not going to be able to move any sort of significant weight through that weakest part of the range of motion. All right, next question. Jason, I can only using a mixed grip on the deadlifts without regularly switching which hand you supinate cause muscle imbalances. I've noticed that I seem to scrape my right shin pronated side a lot more than the left when I deadlift, and my right lumbar erector is at times more fatigued than the left after deadlifting. Could this be the reason? Yeah, the mixed grip can cause very, very small muscle imbalances. However, it's not a big deal, because quite frankly, the deadlift is not the only exercise you're going to be doing for all of these. And if you're doing enough volume and workload on your other exercises that hit all these same muscles, whether it's the spinal erectors or the traps or anything else that you're hitting in the deadlift, it's still going to balance out, and you're very unlikely to get uneven development. Just focus on keeping your technique clean and smooth on the deadlift so that you're not grinding shit out and those weaknesses really coming out and loading one side worse than the other. Like, you don't see me doing many grinders or anything on the deadlift. You shouldn't be grinding your deadlifts. Use it to build strength and power. And then if you need to grind something, come back and use the other accessory movements to do that stuff. And that way, those will build your even development up and even hypertrophy. And you can use the deadlift mainly for the strength building component. I mean, it's always going to have a hypertrophy component, but you're going to a lot of your accessory stuff should balance that unilateral development back out if you're getting a slight imbalance from the mixed grip, as long as you're doing everything correctly and balanced. All right, next question. Can you develop a well-balanced chest with only the standing strict press and the weighted dips given sufficient volume? There we go, the latter term, given sufficient volume and stimulation. Yes, absolutely. You're working all major parts of the pectorals. You're working two very different functions and planes of motion with those. They're both big, heavy compound movements that are time proven to build muscle mass. So yeah, those two combined together, if progressive overload is sufficient and volume and workload is sufficient, then yes, absolutely, you can build a massive, well-rounded chest using just those two exercises. No issue with that. All right, next question. Jason, in a video you made back in the UK, you said you wouldn't use GHRP2 again. Was your diet changed the difference? What are your thoughts on ipamorelin? I hate trying to pronounce that other growth factor there. I'm sorry, it's not a growth factor. It is a growth hormone stimulating peptide. The GHRP2 thing has been far more manageable for me on a ketogenic diet. I'll admit I was running a really high carb diet with it, which for me historically makes me really hungry. I was also doing a vegan diet with it for the most part, which also makes me really hungry. And that ghrelin impact from the GHRP2 was just overwhelming for me. It was really problematic. I couldn't handle it. Now that I'm doing a ketogenic diet, I'm finding it a lot more manageable. Also, keep in mind, I'm not doing a lot of GHRP2. I'm doing 2 shots of it at a saturation dose Monday through Friday, and I don't even use it on the weekends. So it seems to be really mild. I can handle it well. As far as ipamorelin, I'm considering changing over to it just for the nighttime for better sleep anyways in the long term. And if I do that, I may discuss it later in a video. I think it's actually very good. It's very useful. GHRP2 is slightly more cost effective. So it's really oftentimes for people with a budget constraint issue, they just don't want to spend an extra $10 a month for something like, a slightly milder peptide like that. But the big advantage of it is the ability to use it at night, and getting a single shot before bed instead of multiple shots in the morning isn't a bad trade-off. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I'm at 180 pounds, currently slow bulking, drug-free athlete looking to get into powerlifting as a recreational sport. I would like to be competitive, but I do know that I will be going up against enhanced lifters in any Fed, and I accept that. Blah, blah, blah. What are good numbers? You guys can read the question down below. Stop worrying about what good numbers are to be competitive. What you're going to find, your first few meets, you're not going to be competitive for the most part. Your first few meets, you're going to be learning about how to compete. So what I recommend is that you, as soon as you decide, hey, I want to start competing in powerlifting, you go find a meet 3 months out from it, from where you are right now, 3 to 4 months out, and just go do it. Stop waiting till you're competitive. Get to meets and find out what's competitive in your region and in your federation. Don't worry about what's competitive in Texas in the IPF if you're going to compete in Maine in the WPC. It's fucking irrelevant. Get in and just find out what's competitive in your region. Get in and start getting around other lifters. You'll be more motivated. You will make faster progress and become more competitive far more quickly if you start competing sooner rather than later. So stop worrying about all that. Just jump in and compete. And I wouldn't even worry about the drug thing, because in all honesty, the guys with the best genetics and who have really fantastic training oftentimes tend to do really, really well without drugs, even against a heavy drug using field. That's just the reality of it. It's just they're not going to become champions. But again, you might have average genetics, in which case, well, you're just going to lose to the guys on drugs who have the same genetics as you every time. That's just the reality of it. You got to accept it. But it doesn't mean that you can't jump in and be competitive and enjoy it. And you never know what your potential is till you get a few years in. Go in and actually powerlifting compete for 3 to 5 years, and then find out what your actual potential is. You might find that it's better than you thought it was. And remember, a lot of guys who are using drugs still train really stupid, who are in there, and they may not be able to compete with you over the long haul. Meaning, if you come in and you train really intelligently, you run well-written programs for 5 years, you might be surprised how well you stack up against short-timers who are in there, who are on drugs, who've only been training 3 years, and they maybe don't use as good of methods as you do. So just jump in and give it a go, and don't worry about it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.